The blizzard came in off the plains without any particular warning, the way Saskatchewan storms always did, as if the sky had simply decided it was done tolerating everything beneath it. Donovan Reeve had lived on the same quarter section of prairie north of Greyfield for 16 years, and he knew the sound of a real storm before it arrived. It was a specific kind of quiet that came first, not the ordinary quiet of an empty house, but something heavier, like the air itself had gone still in preparation for what was coming. By the time the first flakes hit the kitchen window, he had already brought the horses in, banked the fire to last the night, and filled every available container with fresh water from the well. He was not a man who panicked. He had not panicked when the early frost took half his wheat in '86, nor when the south fence line collapsed during spring flooding, and he spent 3 days in cold water fixing it alone. He had not panicked when the doctor came out from Greyfield in the winter of '88 and stood in the parlor with his hat in his hands and said the words that ended one version of Donovan's life entirely. He had learned a long time ago that panic was simply a way of spending energy you could not afford. So when he pulled on his coat and went out to check on the cattle, one last time before the blizzard closed everything in, he was not alarmed. He was methodical. He counted heads by lantern light, checked the water trough, made sure the barn door latched properly against the wind. He nearly missed her on the way back. She was half buried in the snow against the east fence line, wearing a coat that was not designed for this kind of cold, and carrying a leather bag that had frozen to her hands. Donovan crouched down, held the lantern close, and saw that she was still breathing, barely, her lips pale, her hair iced at the temples. He did not waste time trying to understand how she had ended up in the middle of his property in a November blizzard. He simply picked her up, bag and all, and carried her back to the house. Her name was Sadie Holbrook. He learned that an hour later, when the warmth of the fire and 2 cups of weak tea had brought her back enough to speak. She was 31 years old. She had been the schoolteacher at Greyfield Grammar for 2.5 years. 3 days ago, she had been dismissed. She did not tell him why that night. She told him she had been trying to walk to the railway station at Hartwell, 12 miles south. She had misjudged the weather, misjudged her own endurance, misjudged everything. She said it without self-pity, which he noticed. "The station will still be there in a week," he said. "I don't want to be a burden." He looked at her, at the color slowly returning to her face, the fingers he had wrapped in wool to bring the circulation back, at the careful way she held her spine straight even sitting on a stranger's settle. Wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar, there was something in her that refused to collapse entirely, even now. "You're not," he said, and went back to the fire. He put her in the room at the top of the stairs that had not been used as a bedroom in 3 years. He built the stove up hot and brought extra quilts from the chest in the hall. He did not linger. He was not a man who lingered. In the morning, the storm had sealed them in. Sadie came downstairs at first light, moving carefully on the frost-bitten toes. She had not mentioned the night before. She found him at the kitchen table with coffee and a ledger, and she sat across from him without asking permission. That too, he noticed. She told him the rest of it over breakfast. There was a school fund, money set aside from church donations and a government grant for new books and a proper wood stove for the classroom. She had kept careful records. In October, she discovered that a significant portion of it was gone, and the accounting pointed unmistakably toward Clement Bauer, the town councilor, who handled the fund's bank account. She had made the mistake of writing it down and taking it to Reverend Pollard. Within a week, Clement's wife, Phyllis Bauer, had gone to the school board with a counter-accusation that Sadie herself had been falsifying the records, that the money had been leaving through her hands, that she had been seen purchasing things she could not have afforded on a teacher's salary. The board had no appetite for a fight with the Bauers, Sadie was given 2 days to collect her things. Donovan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he poured more coffee and said, "Did anyone ask to see your records?" "No." He nodded slowly. That was all. She looked at him across the table, at the weathered face, the gray at his temples, the hands that were large and careful and work rude. "You believe me," she said. It was not quite a question. "You don't strike me as someone who steals," he said, "or someone who lies about it if she did." She looked down at her coffee cup. For just a moment, something in her expression shifted. Not quite tears, but the thing that comes just before them. When you've been holding very still for a very long time, and someone says something that makes the holding harder. She did not cry. She straightened her spine again, and asked if she could help with any of the indoor chores while the storm kept them in. He said yes. The blizzard lasted 3 days. By the end of it, Donovan had learned that Sadie made good bread, had strong opinions about the proper way to patch a harness, and laughed with her whole face when something genuinely struck her as funny. Which happened on the second morning when one of the hens had somehow gotten into the kitchen and was standing on the counter investigating a tin of flour. He had not heard laughter in that kitchen in a long time. He stood in the doorway with an armful of firewood and watched her try to coax the hen back toward the door, and he felt something move in his chest. Quiet and unexpected, like ice shifting on a river in early spring. He did not examine it. He set down the firewood and helped her catch the hen. On the third evening, she found the music box on the shelf near the parlor window. It was a small thing, brass fittings, walnut case, the kind a woman might keep on her dressing table. She picked it up and tried to open it, and the mechanism stuck and produced nothing but a dull click. "It's broken," Donovan said from his chair. "Was it your wife's?" A beat of silence. "Yes." She set it back carefully. "I'm sorry. My mother had one something like it. Hers played a waltz. I can't remember which one now." He said nothing. But that night, after Sadie had gone upstairs, he brought the music box to the kitchen table and sat with it under the lamp for a long time, turning it in his hands. The storm broke on the 4th morning. The sky came up clear and cold, and so blue it almost hurt to look at. Donovan went to town for supplies and left Sadie at the farm with the wood stove going and instructions about the afternoon feeding. In Greyfield, he heard what they were saying. Phyllis Bauer had apparently been telling anyone who would listen that Sadie had fled town because she knew the full investigation was coming, that Donovan Reeve had taken her in, and wasn't that just like him, that odd solitary man who never came to the social events or the church suppers, and that whatever was happening out at his farm was exactly the kind of thing that decent people ought to worry about. Donovan bought his flour and his nails and his tin of coffee. He did not respond to any of it. He drove home in the clear cold and did not mention to Sadie what he had heard. But the following week, when Sadie said she needed to go into town to send a letter to her sister in Regina, he drove her himself. Phyllis Bauer was at the post office. The encounter lasted perhaps 4 minutes. Phyllis said what she always said, but louder, with an audience, that Sadie was a thief, that she had no shame showing her face in Greyfield, that whatever Donovan Reeve thought he knew, he was being taken advantage of by a woman who was very good at appearing respectable. Sadie stood absolutely still through all of it. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm in the particular way of someone who has already decided they will not give their dignity away, no matter how hard someone tries to take it. Donovan stepped forward. He was not a large man in any showy sense, but he was solid, and he had a way of occupying space that people tended to notice. He looked at Phyllis Bauer for a moment, just looked at her, and then he said, quietly enough that you had to be standing close to hear it, "I've known liars, Mrs. Bauer. They tend to be loudest when they're afraid of being found out." The post office went very still. Phyllis's face went through several colors. She said something about knowing who his friends were in this town, and what it meant to make enemies of the Bowers. Donovan picked up Sadie's letter from the counter, handed it to the postmaster, and said, "We'll take the usual stamps." He and Sadie walked out together. In the wagon, heading back along the frozen road, neither of them spoke for a while. The bare trees along the creek clicked in the wind. The horses moved steadily. Somewhere far off, a hawk turned slow circles above the white field. "You didn't have to do that," Sadie finally said. "I know. It'll cost you something. In this town, the Bowers cost people things." He kept his eyes on the road. "Let them." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the road as well, and something settled between them. Not resolved, but real. That evening she found him in the parlor, with the music box on his knee, and a set of small watchmaker's tools spread on the side table. He did not look up when she came in, and she did not ask. She sat in the other chair with her mending, and the only sounds were the fire and the wind outside, and the occasional small metal click of his work. She thought he had given up on it when he set it aside to put the kettle on. But an hour later, when she passed through the parlor on her way upstairs, she saw him pick it up again. She did not say anything, neither did he. The truth about the missing school fund came from an unlikely quarter. Eleanor Kemp had run the Greyfield post office for 22 years. She was 71 years old, small and sharp-eyed, and she had seen everything that passed through that town, which meant she had seen what Donovan Reeve did in her post office without flinching, and she had been thinking about it for 2 weeks. Eleanor had a letter. She had held it for 8 months. A bank transfer receipt that had been misdelivered to the post office box she also managed for the school board before Clement Bauer realized the error and came to collect it. She had kept a copy because something in her had said to keep it. Even when she told herself she was imagining things, even when she decided the Bowers were too powerful to go up against, even when she put the copy in an envelope and put the envelope at the back of her cash box and tried to forget it was there. But Donovan had stood in her post office and said what he said, and Sadie Holbrook had stood there, with her hands steady and her dignity intact, and Eleanor Kemp had gone home that afternoon and taken the envelope out of the cash box. She brought it to the town council meeting 2 weeks later. She had asked Reverend Pollard to be present, and the district school board to be present, and the district school board representative who happened to be passing through from Moose Jaw, and she brought the receipt and a letter she had written herself, carefully, with dates and specifics. Clement Bauer went very pale. Donovan was not at the meeting. He had not been invited. But Sadie was, because Eleanor had sent her a note 3 days before. Sadie sat in the back row of the town hall, with her hands folded in her lap and her spine straight, and heard the whole of it laid out in Eleanor's careful, unshakable voice. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had known the truth all along and simply waited for the room to catch up with it. Afterward, in the yard outside the town hall, Eleanor took her hands and held them. "I'm sorry it took me so long," Eleanor said. Sadie shook her head. "You came, that's what matters." She drove herself back to the farm in the early dark. The stars were out. A clear, bitter Saskatchewan night, the kind where the cold itself seems to have a sound, a faint high ringing at the edges of everything. She pulled the horse up in front of the barn and sat for a moment in the wagon before going in. She thought about Thursday. She thought about Thursday. She had said to herself many times that she would leave on the Thursday train. She had been saying it since the second week, when the roads cleared enough and there was nothing keeping her. She could get a teaching post somewhere else, Moose Jaw or Prince Albert or even Winnipeg, where her sister lived. She was good at her work. She had always been good at her work. She had been saying Thursday for 3 weeks now. She unhitched the horse and put it up herself, the way she had learned over the past month. The buckles, the blanket, the grain, She was competent at it now. She supposed she was competent at a lot of things she hadn't expected. When she came into the kitchen, Donovan was at the stove. He turned when she came in, read her face without asking, and nodded once, meaning he understood it had gone well, without her having to explain anything. She sat at the table, and he put a plate in front of her and sat across with his coffee. "They've reinstated me," she said, "effective next term." "Good. The Bowers are finished in this town, I think. Or nearly." He nodded. She looked at him across the table, in the lamplight, in the kitchen, that she had come to know, as well as her own breathing. She looked at him properly, at the steadiness in him that was not coldness, at the care he took with things, at the hands that had carried her in from the snow and fixed the fences and worked quietly for weeks on a music box that wasn't even his anymore to fix. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "The post office. You didn't have to say anything. It wasn't your fight." He was quiet for a moment. "It was the right thing." "That's not a reason. Lots of people know what the right thing is. They don't always do it." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. She had learned that he did this when he was deciding whether to say something. "My wife's name was Ellen," he said. "She died in the winter of '88. Her and the boy both." He said it the way you say something you've said 10,000 times in your own head, worn smooth, no rough edges left. She was a person who told the truth about things, uncomfortable things, things people didn't want to hear, and people in this town didn't always treat her kindly for it. He looked up. "I was not always as quick to stand up as I could have been. I told myself I was protecting her, not making things worse, keeping the peace." He set the cup down. "I know what it cost her to feel like she was standing alone. I know it better than I would like to." Sadie said nothing. The fire settled. Outside, the wind moved across the fields with a sound like something being smoothed flat. "I'm not her," Donovan said very quietly, "but I'm not who I was then either." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He turned his hand and held hers. In the morning, she came downstairs before him and found the music box open on the mantel, playing. She stood in the parlor doorway and listened to it. The waltz was slow and slightly uneven. Some of the teeth of the comb were worn, but it played. It found its melody and held it, thin and sweet, in the cold morning room. She stood there for a long time. When Donovan came downstairs and found her, he stopped in the hallway. He looked at the music box, then at her. He had not told her he'd finished it. He had simply left it there. "It plays a waltz," she said. "Yes. My mother's played a different one." She turned to look at him. "But I think I like this one better." He came into the parlor. He stood near the window, and she stood near the mantel, and the little brass mechanism turned, and the waltz moved through the room between them. "The train to Winnipeg doesn't leave until Thursday," she said. "I know." A beat. "It's Tuesday," he said. She held his gaze. "I know." Another beat. "I've decided I'm not going to Thursday." He crossed the room and took her hand. He did not say anything grand. He was not a man who said grand things. He held her hand in the morning light, in the cold parlor, with the music box playing its imperfect waltz, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was, she realized, the most she had felt in years. The particular warmth of being known, chosen, and not required to be anything other than what she already was. Spring came slowly to the prairie north of Greyfield, the way it always did, grudgingly, a few degrees at a time, with setbacks. The snow retreated from the south-facing slopes first, then from the field edges, then from the shadow of the barn where it had packed hard all winter. Sadie went back to the schoolroom in March, reinstated with a formal apology from the board that she accepted without ceremony. The wood stove was new. The fund had been restored, with interest, as part of whatever arrangement Clement Bauer had made with the council in exchange for a quiet exit from public life. Phyllis was still in Greyfield. She had gone quiet, which was the closest she would come to an apology. And Sadie accepted that too. She walked to school most mornings. On the mornings when the mud was bad, Donovan drove her in the wagon and waited for her in the evenings to drive her home. People in town saw them together and said whatever they said. Some of them waved. One or two crossed the street. Most of them, over time, simply got used to the fact of them. Eleanor always waved. At the farm, the music box played on the mantel. Sadie had developed the habit of winding it in the evenings, a small, daily thing that had nothing to do with grand gestures or declarations, and everything to do with the life she had decided to stay for. She had told her sister in Regina about Donovan. Her sister had written back with 10 questions and a great deal of worry, all of which Sadie appreciated, and none of which changed anything. She had been wrongly accused, dismissed, half frozen in a field, taken in by a stranger, talked about by a town, and made to feel, at the lowest point, like nothing about her was worth keeping. And she had stayed anyway, not because she was stubborn, though she was, and not because she had nowhere else to go, though at the time, that had been nearly true. She had stayed because Donovan Reeve had carried her in from the snow and asked nothing of her, repaired a music box she hadn't asked him to fix, stood in a post office and said what needed to be said, and then held her hand in a cold parlor on a Tuesday morning like it was the most natural thing in the world. She was not what Greyfield had tried to make of her. She never had been. She was what the light shows when someone honest looks at you without flinching. Something whole and solid and entirely worth finding. The waltz played on.